Hello, and welcome to day 6 of the EMI SIG virtual annual meeting. We are so happy that you've decided to join us. Our first presentation this morning is titled Welcome to 2020 Bridging the Communications Gap, and is presented by Jeff Donaldson and Ken Atkins. Ken has 20 years, over 30 years, experience at LANL. And oh, Ken serves as the public information officer during real world events and coordinates drills and exercises for the laboratory's EPI cadre. Jeff has specialized in emergency public information for more than 14 years. And now we welcome Ken and Jeff to our virtual stage.
Well, hello there. My name is Jeff Donaldson. I work in emergency management at Los Alamos National Laboratory. I'm going to be co-presenting today with Ken Atkins, who also works here at LANL. We're going to do a presentation on Welcome to 2020, Bridging the Information Gap. Who remembers way back when computer failure was all we had to worry about ending the world as we know it? Welcome to 2020. Throughout the history of the DOE, our communications and PR professionals have wrestled with the concept of trying to provide timely and accurate information to employees, the media, and the public. No matter how big or small an emergency event becomes, communication is always one of the most important facets. And subsequently, it's also one of the most challenging. The road to what we would call effective emergency public information is littered with the stories of organizations that have been forced to learn about communication gaps the hard way. Check out this quote from Alexander Hamilton. Even as far back as the mid 1700s, he understood the way people are. People, information seeking, passionate, easily misguided, they're very quick sometimes to rush to judgment, and they can be their own worst enemies when it comes to communication, especially during an emergency event. Anyone who is familiar with EPI in the Department of Energy world, which is probably everybody watching this, they're pretty familiar with the public affairs aspect of DOE Order 151.1D, which requires that we provide timely and accurate information as to protect our workers and our facilities. But as we recognize some of the unique challenges in 2020, such as COVID-19, we have to ask the question, what does that requirement and our subsequent responsibility look like when it seems like every day we deal in an emergency? For those who turn to traditional or social media for their news and information, each day we see events now unfolding that cause us to pause, cause us to question, maybe even doubt or fear events that we don't know, as if our healthcare providers and our first responders, our state, local, federal officials, emergency management folks don't have enough to worry about responding to these events. Professionals performing our jobs at DOE are still expected to keep our fingers on the pulse of information flow, monitoring and responding, and coordinating and vetting, and doing our level best to keep our stakeholders up to date on what we're doing in our mission. I think dating back as far as the Boston Marathon bombing, we've all learned that we need to step out as an organization and become the source, the number one source of information, the authority, or else someone else will do that. And I think as we see events unfolding now, in particular with COVID-19, we see that being truer than ever before. So in looking at today's news and information, would anybody argue with the fact that information gaps do exist? It's hard to pass a day and not see a major flaw in the details we receive from sources that we routinely trusted to keep us informed. And thinking back perhaps to something you heard this morning or read on the internet in your news review, you probably can't say with a straight face that every single item on this particular slide was addressed. Although these are all the keys to effective communication. So taking a look at them, we know these, right? Be transparent. The work we do in DOE is very important in support of national security, so there's nothing to hide there. Be timely. This just doesn't apply to emergency events. where we need to get vital information out. It's also, are we getting useful information out at a time that workers and the public need it? Be thorough. Missing details or portraying broad brushstrokes on sensitive issues can be as harmful as not saying anything at all. And of course, be responsive. Are we addressing people's concerns? Are we talking about the information they need when they need it? That brings us to probably one of the most important aspects of good communication, and that's relevance. Being relevant, what does that mean? To truly understand relevance, we should probably first look at how people get their information. This is the world we live in nowadays. When you look at how we receive our information, this slide is very general, obviously. The primary reason is because these topics cover such a wide array of information sources, and of course there are a lot of crossovers. Digital broadcast could be anything from a television news station's news feed to a Facebook Live event. Software applications could be any one of more than 4 dozen applications you load onto your phone that feeds you specific information about your topics of interest based on algorithms that track your search. Streaming media fits into that group too, and of course can include RSS feeds and other live sources. And then of course we have blogs, websites, and social media, which all sort of mix together in one big melting pot of information that can take on different personalities despite performing the same function. How many people have heard the term one size fits all? Of course, despite our best efforts to convince the world that doesn't exist, it is still amazing considering the volume of information out there in 2020 and the multitude of ways to send and receive it, that so many organizations still believe that good communication is data dumping information on Facebook or Twitter, or heaven forbid, send out a press release of all the information we want someone to know and just hope that it sticks. How many organizations have truly thought about their method for monitoring what people are saying, gauging how messages are being received, and then have the mechanisms in place to adjust their messages to ensure our audience understands and comprehends what we're telling them? It can be mind-boggling to think about it, and by no means are we suggesting that Los Alamos National Laboratory has it all figured out. In fact, over the past several months, as we've responded to the COVID pandemic, we can probably share stories with other sites about some of the challenges and difficulties we've encountered trying to identify important information, vet that information through our processes, and disseminate it to the people who need it. I'm sure in talking to all of you folks, our stories would sound pretty similar. But what we wanted to do was highlight some of what we're doing at LANL. First, to share our experience with bridging the information gap, given our community, our workforce, and our unique environment. But also second, to provoke some thought about the concerns we're all having and provide perhaps a platform for brainstorming the solutions that we might benefit all from. So with that, I'm going to transfer it over to Mr. Ken Atkins, who will talk a little bit about what we're doing at Los Alamos.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate it. No, I don't have the right notes. Apologize. Thank you, Jeff. So how do we communicate at LANL? This slide highlights all of our communications platforms based on our needs in northern New Mexico, particularly Los Alamos and surrounding areas. A community of about 50,000 who are fairly familiar with our mission and what happens at the lab. Everbridge is a site-wide communications platform we use to conduct accountability and to push messages out in volume to specific audiences we see fit. We use computers, cell phones, personal phones, anything an employee might use to communicate in a sort of tiered approach that solicits responses. We maintain both internal and external web pages that provide a large amount of current information about everything from the lab's COVID response to events impacting the local community. Of course, we have Facebook and Twitter pages, as well as several email platforms. We've also used YouTube to create communications for our workforce. Each DOE site typically has their own platforms, perhaps a little more social media, perhaps a little less. Some sites likely still rely on the good old press release to get information out. And for some audiences, that might be enough. Only you can determine the best way to get information out to the people that matter to you. Additionally, at LANL, we've established a fairly robust media monitoring program with individuals in our public affairs office who are dedicated to daily monitoring of key news and information platforms. Being a nationally recognized laboratory, we're no stranger to being in the news, and we routinely garner coverage on a wide range of issues and topics from news sources and other sites from around the globe. Since we all perform similar missions in support of the DOE, I'm sure we can all identify with this need to keep tabs on what the rest of the world is saying about us. So coming back to one of the most crucial aspects of good communication and the fundamental question Jeff referred to earlier, how do we ensure we're relevant? Despite all our different communications platforms and information needs of our stakeholders, there are a few aspects of bridging the communications gap that are universal. Whether your site is located in New Mexico, California, Texas, or Tennessee, the items listed here are considered to be tried and true when it comes to effective messaging. And it is in that regard that we've had some of our most intense and significant considerations in the course of the current events surrounding COVID. Perhaps a few of these represent items you are wrestling with as well. Make sure you have your audience's attention. It is entirely possible, considering today's information load, that people are not getting to receive or even respond to a data dump. Granted, if you have an actual emergency that impacts a facility or gets the media or public's attention, well, then they're anxiously waiting for what you have to tell them. But as much of our messaging on a day-to-day basis mixes with everything else going on in the world, it is more important than ever to identify who your audience is, what it is you want to tell them, and the best way to get that information to them. Frankly, this has been a constant work in progress at LANL as we garner the feedback of our employees in particular and the questions they have. We've seen huge swings in this process since February as we adapt our communications to keep up. Obviously, ensuring our messages are clear and timely are equally important. As the COVID pandemic reaches now into our communities and our workforce, we've started to see more people invested in our messaging. The DOE headquarters, lab senior management, newly created task force and working groups, our subcontractor management. We could build quite a lengthy list of organizations within LANL who have now become an integral part of the vetting of information. And each of these groups comes with their own concerns and priorities. One of the biggest things we've seen at LANL is how challenging the process can be now to get information approved and disseminated in the time frame that our workforce needs. A really good example of that is what happened in the middle of March, the week of March 16th. And this is when they had identified a cluster of COVID cases in the Santa Fe area, which is very, within 30-mile distance to the lab. And our management made the decision to close the lab, majority of the workforce teleworking. And that started on that Monday, March 16th. As the public affairs staff, we were in the EOC performing our PIO functions at the time. And we were sitting around wondering, what do we need to be telling employees right now? They're now working from home. What do we think the information is that they're going to need to know? And one of the first things that we came up with is, well, they're working from home. Obviously, by the end of the week, they're going to have to put their time into the system to get paid, into the Oracle system. And they're wanting, and for those who do programmatic work and may not be able to be working on a facility here or doing a science experiment that first week when they're working from home, they're going to want to know what time code to use. And so we brought that up as a crucial issue that we thought our workforce was going to want to know about. It's going to be one of the first things they're going to be thinking about. So we raised that to management. And everybody agreed, yeah, we got to get working on that. Yet we knew we had about 3 or 4 days to get that information out to employees by that Friday of that week when they had to put their time into the system so that our payroll department could process that and get everyone paid the next week. So that issue had to go through the channels here at the lab, through human resources, through our legal office, and then through our NNSA site office, and finally to NNSA headquarters in DC. And at the same time, we were watching this happen from our area here at the PIO desk at the EOC, realizing that time was of the essence. We only had a limited amount of time to get that information out. And in fact, we were kind of pinging it on almost an hourly basis, and it eventually did get approved, and they had all this information ready. We had to put it up on the website, give employees information on how to charge their time, what codes to use, and that was actually done by Thursday of that week in a 3-day time span. But that's one of the great examples of how you come up with information that you think the employees are going to need, yet all of these organizations need to vet and approve that. And at the same time, you know that time is of the essence. So it's a really good example of one of the things we've had to deal with very early on in the COVID pandemic here at WOW. And lastly, for this one, sometimes the key to sorting through the quagmire perhaps is just telling it like it is, saying what you mean and meaning what you say. Part of being a trusted source is ensuring that people receiving your message have the utmost confidence that you know what you're talking about. Despite the current culture of distrust in the media, a lot of people can recognize a fake from a mile away. You never want to leave important messaging to chance. And finally, moving back to actually the last bullet on that slide, ask for feedback. And that last bullet item, of course, kind of leads into this next slide. At LANL, we've been looking for quite a bit of ways to get feedback, and spending quite a bit of time monitoring what people are saying and the questions they're asking regarding COVID and our current operating posture here at the lab. These are some of the examples of what we've used, and some of the things that we're considering using. First of all, surveys, opinion polls. We've been using these fairly frequently, with an emphasis now on gauging whether certain communication issues are worth pursuing and how people are receiving the information that we're putting out. Secondly, forums. These require a little bit more planning, of course, but we've used these in the form of virtual all-employee meetings with our lab director and a recent site visit by the NNSA administrator last month, where employees submitted questions in advance. This is not only important, these type of forums, for getting out vital information, but it can also assist in establishing some trust and confidence that the lab management has the situation under control as much as possible. I believe we've probably had about 3 or 4 of these so far. The third item here has quickly become critically important in getting timely communications out, and that is coordinating with management, as I just mentioned in that example, with the time charging guidance. It's critical in coordinating with management to get their buy-in on strategies before you actually need the messaging. This is something we've definitely been learning. And of course, coordinating approvals can help in eliminating some of that back and forth that happens nowadays during the information process. Lastly, of course, it helps to develop short and long-term strategies for how you're going to handle information, and also to build in place a mechanism for adjusting the process as you go. Frankly, we'd love to tell you that we've got that part down, but I'm sure you can all relate to how some of the challenges from COVID have forced us to take a step back and consider what and how we're communicating key messaging. Perhaps that's the moral of the story. Be open-minded and flexible to the constant change required now to keep up. Just another example here is, one of the things we've been using to make sure that the communication needs remain forefront in this pandemic is we have weekly meetings of what we call a pandemic advisory team. And it consists of lab management, our health and safety experts, our medical doctor, staff from the emergency management operation. And a key role is we've had one of our communications staff on board for those weekly calls. Ever since this probably goes back to the February timeframe when we first realized that there could be an issue with the pandemic. And it's important to have a communications person on board and have a key role in those type of teams, working groups, just to make sure that, number one, we're making sure that the communications issues are always at the forefront of these discussions, And also it's key to make sure we have one of our communications staff in those meetings so that they can be aware of everything else that's going on and bring that information back to the team. So what are some of the other ways LANL is addressing some information needs? We've initiated a few other processes at LANL to ensure we're ready for any of the changes we might need to make, considering the circumstances and the information needs of our workforce, the media, and the public. Some of these are a little broader and address our overall emergency public information. We've made some changes with the JIC, our Joint Information Center. Like many sites, we've moved toward a social media-based response in emergency public information, EPI. And that has required us to move a lot of our key EPI operations over to the ESC. However, with current needs requiring an increase in offsite interface, media monitoring operations, and DOE headquarter oversight, we've enhanced our JIC operations to move a lot of our processes back to the JIC, including the incorporation of Web EOC and other technologies that aid in our coordination of EPI. Additionally, with so many of the lab's personnel working virtually, we've also had to look at how we're addressing issues such as training. We've established a number of training briefings as well as communication products that require a virtual approach to delivery. Most of these are communicated through email, but we're looking at other methods for making information available through what appears to be perhaps a long-term approach. Another aspect that has helped us immensely is giving consideration to the types of subject matter expertise we might need in our messaging. Our occupational medicine personnel have now been rolled into our emergency management process as a matter of routine. And we've reached out to other groups, including logistics, first responders, security, and cyber, all to assist us in ensuring we have the most effective information process in place. All of these assist us in identifying issues and solutions and ensure that we are continuously improving how we strive to bridge the communication gap during these challenging times. Of course, you don't have to look too far or be too creative to see the benefits to some of these approaches. Political and economic support. Without the political and financial support and those individuals understanding what and why we're doing what we do here at LANL, none of this is going to matter. Reputation management. Obviously, we want to be good stewards of our very important national security mission, and we want people to see that we take our mission seriously and that we know what we're doing. Credibility. Being credible, trustworthy. All of these are obvious benefits of ensuring information is getting out at the right times to the right people. Community. Most of us have communities around us that are used to us. They know us. They know what we do, and in most cases support us. You can't say enough about the importance of ensuring you achieve and maintain local support, as a lot of these folks work at your facility or have loved ones who work there. Good communication is essential to preventing the spread of misinformation or widening the communication gap on issues that are important. Safety. Of course, safety is our number one concern, and especially during COVID, what we have to tell people can have a huge impact on issues that affect their health and safety. It's important that we get it right. And just lastly, to circle back one more time, all of this equals trust. Without trust, we're never going to be able to bridge the communication gap. That's the end of our presentation. Does anyone have any questions for us?
Thank you so much, Jeff and Ken, for that excellent presentation. We so appreciate your time and expertise that you've shared. Remember, if you have a question for Ken or Jeff, since we didn't have time for Q&A in this session, just go ahead and look to the left at the speaker tab and you can send them an email. I know they'll be glad to respond to you. And also, before you leave, check the survey at the bottom, give them some feedback, and that'll give you credit for attending this session as well. Our next session is Social Media Golden Hour for Emergency Public Information, and it's presented by Holly Harden. I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So select that tab, or you're always welcome to join a workshop or an SBI demonstration or participate in a user group. And once again, thank you for joining us.